Imagine you are a 19-year-old American sailor. It is 1945. You are standing on the deck of the USS Bunker Hill in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You look up at the sky, you see a Japanese Zero fighter. But it's not dogfighting, it's not dropping bombs, it is diving. Straight at you. The anti-aircraft guns are deafening. Boom. Boom. You see pieces of the plane flying off. The wing is on fire. The pilot is dead or dying. But the machine keeps coming. It defies the laws of survival. Every instinct in nature tells a living thing to survive, to pull up. But this plane doesn't pull up. In Han, instant. 400 of your shipmates are dead. This was a new kind of war. A war where the enemy didn't want to go home. A war where the soldier was the weapon. To the Americans, they were fanatical madmen. To the Japanese Empire, they were floating chrysanthemums or falling cherry blossoms. We know them by another name. Kamikaze, the divine wind. Today, we open the file on the most terrifying psychological tactic of World War II. Why did thousands of young men, poets, students, sons volunteer to die? And what was going through their minds in those final one-way seconds? To understand the kamikaze, we must understand the smell of defeat. By late 1944, Japan was losing. The Imperial Navy had lost its best aircraft carriers. Their experienced pilots were dead, lying at the bottom of the ocean. The Americans were closing in on the Philippines. Japan had no ships left to fight a conventional war, but they had thousands of obsolete planes, and they had thousands of inexperienced young men. Enter Vice Admiral Tokijiro Nishi. On October 19, 1944, he walked into a meeting at Mobilikat Airfield in the Philippines. He looked at his commanders and said something that would change history. I do only think there would be any other way to carry out the operation than to put a 250 kilograms bomb on a Zero and let it crash into a U.S. carrier in order to disable her for a week. The room went silent. This was a death sentence, but it was also seen as the only way to save the nation. They called it the Special Attack Unit Tokkōtai. The concept was simple. One plane, one pilot, one warship. A fair trade. But for the pilot, there was no trade. There was no parachute. There was no plan B. The mission was successful only if you did not return. How do you convince a human being to commit suicide? You don't just order them. You turn it into a religion. You turn it into art. In Japanese culture, the cherry blossom is a powerful symbol. It blooms beautifully, but its life is incredibly short. It falls from the branch at the peak of its beauty, rather than withering away and getting old. The military propaganda machine used this metaphor to brainwash a generation. They told these young men, do not wither like an old man. Fall beautifully like a cherry blossom for the emperor. Before a mission, a ritual would take place. It was solemn, like a funeral for the living. The pilots would put on a hachimaki, a white headband with the rising sun or the characters for certain victory written on Italiano. They would wrap 1,000-stitched belts and embari around their waist of cloth, stitched by 1,000 women, believed to protect the soul. They would write final letters home. They would clip their fingernails and cut off a lock of their hair. These clippings were put into a small wooden box and sent to their parents. This box would be their only remains. Then they were given a ceremonial cup of water. They toasted to their death. As they climbed into their cockpits, many of them carried a sword or a pistol, not to fight the enemy, but to kill themselves if they crashed and survived. Capture was not an option. As their engines started, they weren't just pilots anymore. They were gods, the gods of thunder. There was a common stereotype in the West that kamikaze pilots were mindless, screaming zealots, robots with no feelings. But the strange file truth is much more tragic. Many of the kamikaze were not professional soldiers. They were university students. They were the intellectual elite of Japan. They studied law, literature, and philosophy. They read German philosophers like Kant and Nietzsche. They played the piano. When we read their diaries today, we don't find the ravings of madmen. We find profound sadness. One pilot, a graduate of the University of Tokyo, wrote in his diary, "I am reading a book on philosophy. I am trying to find a reason why I must die tomorrow. I cannot find it, but I will fly anyway, because I want to protect my mother. This is the heartbreaking reality. They were not dying for the emperor. They were dying for their families. The military told them, if you don't do this, the Americans will come and rape your sisters and kill your mothers. It was pure pressure on a national scale. If you volunteered, you were a hero. If you refused, you were a coward who brought shame to your ancestors. Some pilots were so eager to live that they would return to base, claiming engine trouble. Once, twice, maybe 3 times. But eventually, the mechanics would fix the plane, and the commander would look at them with cold eyes, and they would have to go. As the desperation grew, the Japanese engineers built something even more terrifying than a Zero fighter. They built the MXY-7 Ohka. The Americans called it the Baka bomb. Baka is Japanese for idiot. This wasn't a plane, it was a manned cruise missile. A wooden glider strapped with 1,200 kilograms of explosives and 3 rocket boosters. It was carried underneath a bomber. When they got close to the U.S. fleet, the bomber would drop the Ohka. The pilot inside would ignite the rockets. The acceleration was brutal. It would scream toward the ocean at 600 miles per hour. At that speed, it was almost impossible to shoot down. But here is the most chilling detail. The Ohka had no landing gear. It had no wheels. Once you got in, the canopy was bolted shut from the outside. You were literally a part of the guidance system, a biological computer processor for a bomb. There is a story of an Ohka pilot who climbed into his machine. He looked at the mechanic bolting him in and joked, "Police it well. It's my coffin." For the U.S. Navy, the Battle of Okinawa in 1945 was a descent into madness. The Kamikaze attacks were relentless. They came in waves. The Americans called it the divine wind. But to the sailors on the radar picket ships to destroyers, stationed alone to warn the fleet, it was pure horror. The USS Laffey, a single destroyer, was attacked by 22 kamikaze planes in 80 minutes. Imagine the sound. The sirens never stopped. The guns never cooled down. You shoot down 1, and 2 more take its place. Psychological reports from the U.S. Navy showed that sailors began to crack. They couldn't sleep. Every time they heard an engine, they flinched. The stress of waiting for a human bomb to fall out of the sky caused more combat fatigue cases than any other battle in the Pacific. Because how do you fight an enemy who wants to die? You can't scare them. You can't negotiate with them. You can only kill them before they kill you. Let us end with the voice of one of these young men. Ensign Ryoji Uehara was 22 years old. He loved economics and liberty. He was not a fanatic. Before his final mission, he wrote this letter to his parents. Tomorrow, one who believes in liberty and liberalism will leave this world. Behind his departure, perhaps a lonely smile will remain. Please do not weep for me. I have lived a happy life. I will take the spirit of the cherry blossom with me. I will scatter beautifully. He flew his plane into the ocean on May 11th, 1945. By the end of the war, nearly 4,000 kamikaze pilots had died. They sank or damaged over 300 U.S. ships. They killed 7,000 Allied sailors. But they did not stop the American fleet. They did not save the empire. The divine wind failed. In the end, it was a tragedy of waste. Thousands of bright, educated young men were turned into guidance systems for steel and explosives. They were told their death would be glorious, like falling cherry blossoms. But war is not a garden. War is just blood, and fire, and silence. Those 4,000 letters, locks of hair, and fingernails left in wooden boxes are all that remain of a generation that was asked to trade their future for a myth. If you found the story of the kamikaze fascinating and heartbreaking, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We dig into the strangest files of history every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.